The following is a dramatized account of a real-life event from my time on patrol. Names and locations have been changed out of respect for the individuals involved. It was a Friday night in August of 2013, one of those hot, restless nights when calls come in back to back. Summer nights are the busiest, and tonight was no different. It had been a non-stop shift so far, calls of robberies, burglaries, assaults with deadly weapons, and even a few minor traffic accidents. It was just past midnight, and I was finally starting to feel like things were calming down. For the first time that night, I thought I might actually get a chance to get some reports completed. Just then, the dispatcher came over the radio, assigning me to another call, a domestic disturbance just a few blocks away. When I arrived on scene, I parked my cruiser a couple of houses down. As I walked toward the house, I noticed the silhouette of a woman standing outside, her movements frantic. As I got closer, the details became clearer. A dim porch light cast a weak glow over the yard, barely enough to see by, but enough for me to make out her disheveled appearance. Her hair was plastered to her sweaty face, and even from a distance, I could tell she had nothing in her hands. No weapon, no objects, just trembling, erratic gestures. As she continued with stiff, jerky movements, she suddenly noticed me approaching. She identified herself as Amy and began shouting at me. "He hit me, my husband, he attacked me, I was sleeping and he came at me." Her words tumbled out with a kind of frantic desperation. I called her over to me, as I stood on the sidewalk near the shrubbery that separated her front yard from the neighbors, positioning myself so I could speak with her while keeping an eye on the front door. That's when I noticed it, a dark smear near her mouth. At first it seemed like a shadow, but as she shifted it caught my eye again. I flicked on my flashlight, aiming it at her face. The beam revealed something more disturbing. Blood, fresh and dark, smeared across her lips. She continued to shriek. "I tried to get away, I woke him up and then I tried to get away, he just came at me." Her story was inconsistent and not quite adding up, though not entirely unusual for someone in such a heightened emotional state. I tried to calm her as she continued talking. As I watched her eyes and body language, I was piecing together a vague yet uncertain sense of what may have happened. Officers Davies and Hatcher arrived on scene. I quickly briefed them on my initial impressions and what I had observed so far. Without hesitation, they headed inside to make contact with the husband. Not more than a minute had passed when I heard the radio crackle with a call for paramedics, confirming my suspicion. There was more to this story than she was letting on. I lowered the light and glanced down at her hands. Blood caked under her fingernails, and there were small chunks of something else, hanging from two of her nails. I asked her what happened to her hands. "I was trying to protect myself. My husband attacked me and I was protecting myself and my daughter." Officer Davies walked out of the house, his face tense but calm. Davies took one look at the woman and then at me. "This looks about right," Davies told me. "Hatcher and I spoke to the husband and daughter separately. Their stories match up. You're gonna want to check them out yourself." I nodded, and as I made my way toward the front door while Davies stood outside with Amy. Inside the house, the atmosphere was tense but eerily quiet. As I entered, I saw the husband, Brian, sitting at the kitchen table, holding a blood-soaked rag to his face. His stepdaughter, Mia, sat on his lap, clutching him tightly. Her arms were wrapped around his neck, pressing herself into him as if he were her only source of safety. Officer Hatcher, positioned just a few feet away, gave me a grim nod, confirming this situation was worse than anticipated. "She bit me," Brian told me. He then removed the bloody rag, revealing the injury. A chunk of his right cheek, about the size of a quarter, was missing. Jagged edges of torn flesh surrounded the exposed cheekbone, a grotesque testament to the violence he'd endured. His eyes gazed down to Mia, who rested her head on his shoulder. I think she was high again. She only behaves this way when she's using. It all began earlier that evening when Mia came to me, upset after her mom Amy had been screaming at her in a fit of rage. Amy overheard Mia tell me that her mom was scaring her. That's when Amy stormed down the hall and got in Mia's face, screaming, "I'm your mom, he's nobody to you!" I hugged Mia to shield her from Amy's aggression. Then Brian's voice silenced a moment, and tears welled up in his eyes, a father's pain breaking through. He continued the story. "Then Amy left the house. I didn't know where she went, I was just relieved she was gone. So I carried Mia to bed, tucked her in, and read her a story until she fell asleep. Once she was out, I went to bed, hoping for a calmer morning. Suddenly I woke up and Amy was standing over me biting my face. She bit off my cheek and spat it at me and started screaming. I was confused, I was half asleep and I was in pain. I tried pushing her away and she began scratching my arms. Brian then pulled up his left sleeve, revealing deep, bloody scratches running down his upper arm. The skin had been gouged by Amy's nails, explaining the bloody chunks still underneath them. Brian continued. She didn't stop. While I was trying to make sense of what was happening, Mia ran into the room and laid on top of me, trying to protect me from her mom. That's when Amy started hitting Mia too. His voice wavered, teetering on the edge of breaking as he relived the event. Mia's my daughter. She's not my blood, but for the past 8 years, she's been my daughter. I'd do anything for this little girl. She was trying to protect me while her mom was battering me. And Mia took some of the punishment. At that moment, Brian couldn't hold back any longer. He broke down, weeping, the weight of everything finally overwhelming him. I knelt down to look at Mia. Her small face was freshly bruised. She had deep scratch over her temple. She flinched as I gently touched her arm. There was swelling. Brian motioned toward the bedroom down the hall. That's where it happened. I followed his gaze and made my way to the bedroom. The room was a wreck. Blankets thrown aside, a lamp lay in pieces on the floor. Fresh spattered blood stained the bed sheets, and there, near the headboard, just beside the pillow, was the piece of flesh that had been torn from Brian's face. When I returned to the kitchen, the paramedics had arrived to treat Brian and Mia. Outside, I could hear Officer Davies calmly dealing with Amy. It wasn't long before the confirmation came through. Amy was high on methamphetamine. She was placed under arrest for felony child abuse, felony spousal abuse, mayhem, and being under the influence of a controlled substance. Child Protective Services were called, and Officer Hatcher accompanied Brian and Mia to the hospital to treat their injuries. As I watched them drive away in the back of the ambulance, the weight of the night settled heavily on me. The physical wounds would eventually heal, but it was Mia's emotional scars that worried me. The terror and confusion she'd felt, clinging to her stepfather for protection, would stay with her far beyond tonight. It was clear that Brian truly cared for her. He had done what he could to shield her from the chaos of the night. But no matter how much love or protection he offered, the damage left by a mother's violence and betrayal would be much harder to mend. Only time would reveal the depth of those scars. If you found this first-hand account of my experience on patrol engaging, be sure to click the link on your screen for another real-life story of police work. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you'll be notified when new stories are posted. There's always more to uncover in the day-to-day life of law enforcement, and you won't want to miss what's coming next.